Today is August 15th, 2019, and I'm interviewing Erin Fitzgerald in Toronto. Thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
Can you please tell me a bit about your background? What drew you to theater?
Well, growing up, I always loved as a theater as a kid. I enjoyed going to theater, and then through high school, I participated in high school shows, and at university, I was sort of involved in university theater and community theater, and I always thought that it was going to be my hobby. I was studying sciences, and I love the sciences, but I love theater as a hobby. And then I realized sort of, quite a ways in that actually, I really love theater more, and I want to try this as a career. And I was really fortunate in that right away I was able to start apprenticing as an apprentice stage manager, and that's how I joined Canadian Actors Equity after a year of apprenticing. I did 6 credits, all in 1 year, and that was 20 years ago, and here I am, 20 years as a stage manager, based in Southern Ontario, living in Toronto, but mainly working here in Ontario. Yeah.
Tell me more, how did you find out about this apprenticeship?
Well, I had been having fun and volunteering and doing things at the university, at McMaster University, where I was studying, and I'd been doing a little bit of community theater work, and mainly as, obviously, backstage, so a little bit of props, a little bit of wardrobe, just helping out with scene changes, things like that, and then sort of finding my way into being sort of a backstage, sort of an assistant stage manager, or doing whatever was needed backstage, and sort of then from there discovering, there's a career in stage management. One can actually make a living doing this, and that's how I found out that this is how you do it. And I sort of went to Theatre Aquarius in Hamilton, was where I did my first apprenticeship, and sort of was mentored there and learned about stage management and also how to join equity in Canada, which was an important part of becoming a member of the professional association, is how you get your work here. So yeah, that's how that happened. Yeah.
And how long does apprenticeship usually last?
You need to do, if you're working in more than one theater, you need to do 6 credits. And by credits, usually means a show. So you need to do 6 shows. If you're doing all of your credits in one theater company, I believe it's still 8. You need to do a few more. There's really no time limit. I happen to do mine all in a year, but people can take 3 years. People can do more than the 6 that are needed if they wanted to explore different avenues. But I did all of my 6 in the 1 year and joined equity pretty much right after that. Yeah.
And what's usually required in order to be accepted as an apprentice?
I know that now, when I'm looking to hire an apprentice, often it's you're not expecting someone to come in with a lot of skills if they're brand new, if they've never done it before. But what you do expect is someone who is interested in pursuing this as a career, or exploring to see if they want to do it. Someone who is going to be a good person to work on a team with other stage managers, and hopefully has a few skills or interests. Have they worked in theater, or have they volunteered in theater? Have they done some training in their school? Something to show an interest or aptitude to possibly becoming a stage manager. And that's what you're looking at for a lot of shows. If it's a really big show, or like for instance a big commercial musical theater show, often you need an apprentice who's done a few credits, who has a little bit more professional experience. But honestly, when someone's first starting out, really you're looking at more personality. Do they have an aptitude? Are they interested? And would they be someone you'd want to work with for a few weeks?
Do you need to be an extrovert in order to be a good stage manager?
I think you need to be, not necessarily, but I think you need to be confident enough to communicate, because that's a really important and big part of our job, is to be able to communicate. You can be an introvert at home, you can be, quiet and reserved, absolutely, but when it comes to communicating what needs to be communicated at the time, you need to be able to do that.
And what's the key to success when you deal with so many different temperaments? Sound actors are very famous, they probably,
The hardest part of the job is dealing with the people. It really is. Giving notes, working with a big team of various personalities, and of varying needs. You know, an actor would have a different need in a rehearsal process than the director maybe, or a member of the design team. I think patience, being clear when you communicate, is important when you're dealing with various personalities. Having a little bit of understanding, but also being confident in the way you present information. Whether it's clarity, you need to be very clear in how you present something. Whether that be, for instance, if you're in a rehearsal process, where are you starting from? Where are we finishing? Often, stage managers, we're calling the breaks and we're calling, end of the day, and being very, clear, I think, is important. And as far as dealing with different personalities, that is the big challenge of the job, is dealing with people and trying to understand where they're coming from, understanding what they need to do their job, and how we can all hopefully work together to support the process and to be a part of the process that's going to be in front of an audience. Yeah.
How do you work on, creative problem solving? How do you improve your skills?
Experience, honestly. It's just something you practice. Every day it's going to be something that's a really important part of being a stage manager, is the creative problem solving. Trying to think through options, always having a plan B, a contingency, always trying to look ahead to think potential problems, try to avoid those, even in the rehearsal process of being proactive about your day, planning, looking ahead of the schedule to see, okay, what's going to be needed, how can we as stage managers prepare for the day and make sure that the process for the rehearsal day runs smoothly, and that's important. And so a lot of that is experience, and a lot of that is the learning of day one. All right, how do I look at this rehearsal schedule, for instance, and see how do I support the process that's happening that day. Looking ahead, do we need, it's a big musical number with lots of dancing. Where are there rehearsal skirts? Do we need them? What props do we need for this scene? Are we set up for the day? I see that we're starting on scene 5. Well, are we set up for scene 5 in the rehearsal hall? Those sorts of things. It's an important part of learning when you start out as an apprentice, and throughout your career you always are doing that, of how can we do this? How do we support a room? How do we think about, like, if you're on a show with scene changes, how do we look at what do we do if something goes wrong? What do we do if something gets ill? Thinking about those contingency plans is an important part as well of something that we do as stage managers, to make sure that the show that the audience sees is as the best it can be every day.
Can you please give me an example of some stressful situations that you had to deal with?
Oh gosh, it's stressful things. Sometimes can be obviously things that you don't want to deal with. Things like illness and injury are never any fun. Having to, often in a rehearsal process, it's maybe not as big a deal. Someone's injured or ill. It's unfortunate, but you deal with it, and it's really low stress. But when you're in front of an audience in the middle of a show, it's higher stress. Dealing with that. How do you continue a performance? When do you decide that you need to stop a performance? Scenery that doesn't do what it's supposed to do, things like that. And so part of our job is always, if you can go forward, if the show can continue in a safe way for the audience, absolutely you do. If it is unsafe, how do you then safely and clearly stop a show, fix the problem, and restart a show? And that's an important part of it as well, learning how to do that and how to do it clearly so the audience. Honestly, I always tell people that you never want to have to stop a show, of course, but if you have to, you do. And the audience that's in there, who's seeing that show, it's part of the, they have a little bit of pride. They say, oh, I was there the day that they had to stop. And no, it's not ideal, but if you can do it in a way that everyone is safe and everyone knows where you're stopping, when you're going to pick up, letting your audience know, we obviously have a technical difficulty, we need to stop the show, please stay in your seats, etc. That sort of thing, basically communicating. is an important thing, and it's stressful, and it happens, and you just, you're trying to keep everyone in the loop, communicate it, everyone knows what's going on, and then dealing with fixing the problem, either fixing the scenery or, getting someone some first aid and putting in an understudy or whatever you need to do to keep it going. Mm-hmm.
If something goes wrong when you're calling the show,
Yes.
you have to decide on spot how to proceed,
Yes,
or
usually.
is it your call or PSM?
Whoever, usually on a big show, whoever's calling the show usually has the best information about what the problem is. And so sometimes the PSM happens to be right behind you and they're like, yep, stop. Other times the PSM is, maybe they're out front watching, maybe they're up in the office, and so you would make that decision of, okay, no, well, obviously we have to stop. Obviously this massive big scenery isn't moving, so obviously we need to stop. And so, yeah, you would need to decide because you're the one who's actually in communication with all the departments over headset. Yeah. And as an ASM, someone who's backstage, it's very possible that the ASM has information that the calling stage manager doesn't have. And so they're an important part of communication, especially around illness and injury, because obviously the person who's calling the show may have no idea about what's happening in the wings. So your ASM sometimes, they wouldn't necessarily stop a show, but they would communicate the fact that there's been an illness or an injury that's happened backstage, and they've told the calling stage manager, and the calling stage manager then has to decide, can we put someone in midstream and maybe no one will notice, or if the audience does, we can do an announcement at intermission, or do we stop? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was wondering, what, like an apprentice in comparison to ASM,
Yeah.
like what do they do?
Depends on the show. Sometimes if if they're brand new, maybe they're just in the rehearsal hall. Maybe they're doing things like making sure the pencils are sharpened, the coffee's made, making sure that helping out setting up the day. They might be given a task. They might be told, hey, apprentice, on this show, the wardrobe track is probably very simple. We'd like you to learn how to do that. Here's how you do that. Here's some paperwork examples. Go for it. And then we would let the apprentice try it. Try tracking wardrobe. They would be helped out, and if they needed any information, they'd be monitored how it was going, but they might be given that responsibility. Or if it was a smaller show with maybe fewer props, they would do that. So they would be learning the tasks of the ASM, learning those paperwork skills, learning about props tracking or wardrobe tracking. They might be responsible for that with support, or they might be in a team where they are really there just learning and supporting the stage management team through things like being the person who's doing the photocopying, being the person who's on book, or running lines with people. That's another thing that just depends on the team. Mm-hmm.
Is it kind of similar to a production assistant, or?
It can be. But you would hope, at least I usually hope when I'm working with an apprentice, that you're giving them a bit more experience, a bit more of a door into or a window into how we work, and hopefully giving them something to do. Like not just sitting there running lines, which, hey, is an important skill and it's important in the room, but things like, all right, here's how you do a props preset list. It's now your job. You update it. You keep it going. And they might be also helping out in backstage as well. On a show that's in a regional theater, for instance, they would tech the show with the stage management team, and they often would be backstage during the running of a show, and so they might be given responsibilities backstage of being back at a certain side of the stage, a certain wing, cueing moves, or if you're in a non-union theater, hey, helping out with scene changes or costume changes. That's possible too. Your apprentice often is doing that as well as part of their learning process. Yeah, they're being treated not as an ASM, but as someone who is gaining those skills, as someone who's backstage as an ASM, pretty much. Yeah.
Are there many apprenticeships opportunities in Toronto, like maybe like places like Show Festival, Stratford, or some theaters?
Yeah, lots of places hire apprentices. maybe even theater. Many theater companies, and the opera, and lots of places in Toronto do. And there are lots of variety in the type of teams an apprentice might be on. Sometimes it's just maybe in a smaller company or a smaller show, it's just a stage manager and an apprentice, and that's it. Sometimes it's a situation where there's a stage manager, an ASM, and an apprentice. Sometimes on really big teams, a stage manager, 2 ASMs, 2 apprentices. It just really depends. And sometimes a theater company may not hire apprentices for most of their season, except for that really big show that they do once a year. And so they'll need extra people, and so they'll look for apprentices. So that's possible too. Yeah. But there are lots of opportunities, yeah.
How do you find out about these opportunities?
So if you are looking to join equity and you're going to go that route in your career and you want an equity apprentice credit or equity apprenticeship, there's a bunch of ways to do it. The best way is to go on the Canadian Actors Equity website, and you look and they have a whole section there about how to become an apprentice, the information about what they'll need to join equity, and they also have a list of theater companies that in the past 12 months have hired apprentices. Because when you are hired as an apprentice, an equity apprentice, you actually sign a contract. And that contract, you get a copy, the theater company gets a copy, and 1 copy goes to equity. So equity has on file that you have done 1 apprentice credit, and there it is. And so you actually have a signed contract with equity. So if you go on that website, look at that information. You can also, you don't need to be a member of equity, you can sign up for the Equity E-Drive, and it's a job listing for all the jobs that might come through equity. So it could be acting jobs, it could be, directing jobs that maybe you're not interested in, but they also have apprentice jobs come through too, that you can then see what places have put out a call for apprentices, and you can send in your resumes through there.
And in your opinion, and from your experience, how old is kind of too old to get started?
I
Like
think
if you don't have any experience at all.
no experience at all, and you suddenly want to get into theater.
Yeah.
I think it's unlikely. I think very few members of the general public know what a stage manager is and know that there is even people backstage doing those things. But if you're someone who, let's say, in middle age, has watched theater, has enjoyed theater, has maybe done community theater, right? Has had a career, and at night you've been doing theater in the community setting, why not? If you actually want to make a career change, if you have those experience, you have that experience, you do have experience, you do have enough experience to be an apprentice. And then maybe you take some time to do some credits and to see, is this something you really want to do? Because there are many wonderful things about this job. The variety is great. Working in different theaters is great, different cities, working all over the country, meeting amazing people. But there's also the flip side of that is when you're in rehearsal and when you're in shows, you work 6 days a week. You work every night, pretty much. You often work weekends. So if you've been in a quote unquote 9 to 5 normal job, then suddenly, your whole life has been built around that. And to switch over to now you're working nights, and suddenly, all your friends and family are like, you're not available for every, wedding, every family reunion, every weekend birthday party because you're working. It can be maybe a hard switch, not skills wise, but lifestyle wise. It's a change from working a normal job. It could be maybe more difficult than the skills. Mm-hmm.
I have a random question.
Yeah.
If gender people in Toronto, for example, their only day off is on Monday,
Yes.
do they usually get married on Mondays, or like if all their friends work,
Yeah. I mean, one thing, it's great to go to the grocery store because no one's doing groceries on a Monday morning. But yeah, it can be really hard. I think a lot of people find it really hard in this business. And I think that's why, especially stage managers who we often have the advantage, I think, maybe over an actor. Because an actor, I think there are many more actors. And so when they audition, they're up against many, many, many people. And so perhaps they aren't working quite as often. Whereas a stage manager, we tend to work more steadily. And so that means that, yeah, you're going with 1 day off a week on a Monday off, like for months. And so yeah, it can be really hard on people's friendships with those who work outside the business. really difficult.
And how do you find time if you have children, for example? How do you balance your family with your career?
I mean, a lot of stage managers, if they are going to have a family, if you have a partner, you're dating, whatever, if you have someone who's understanding, awesome. Often a lot of us are with someone who is in the business in some way, so they understand the hours. But I think a lot of my friends who have children, it's a really hard thing to balance. So maybe it is you have to switch out for a while out of theater and maybe go into event work where it's shorter contracts. It's just maybe a weekend or a few days on doing a corporate event or something like that. Perhaps moving into instruction or teaching. A lot of people who leave stage management for a while, maybe, while their kids are young, or go into something that has different hours or better hours for at least, a few years. And some leave completely. Often stage managers get to the 10-year mark and burn out. You get tired of doing 6 days a week. You want to explore other things that this career maybe doesn't allow. And so often people leave after around 10 years. So there's that too. There are ways to do it. I think you really need to have a very strong support network. And I admire greatly my friends in this business who have had children and have still kept working as stage managers. And I think they will tell me, and they have told me, that it's often because of a really supportive partner, a great support network that allows them to work the hours that they do.
Let's talk about, if you don't mind, mental health. If you're taking care of everyone, who takes care of you?
Yeah, it's really interesting. More and more, a lot of us are talking more about how do we balance our lives, how do we take care of ourselves, self-care, mental health. And I think some of it is knowing when to take breaks. The great thing about this job is because we are freelance, is there is flexibility. So yes, while we're working, it's intense, it's a lot of hours, and it's 6 days a week. But what we can do is we can book time off. We can just not book ourselves. If you really want to go on a really huge vacation for a month, you're not taking a leave of absence from work. You just don't book yourself for that time. So there is that, is to make sure you do that. Make sure you take time, Make sure that you are eating well and sleeping. And, on your day off, actually taking some part of that day off, and doing whatever you do you love. Personally, for me, I love being outside, I love hiking, I love being in my garden, I love being outdoors, I love camping, and so when I can, that's what I do when I'm not working in a dark theater all day. But it's really important, and more of us are recognizing that, and we're not pushing ourselves and booking up every spare minute with work, if we can. Mm-hmm.
And if the show is a flop,
yep.
How do you and when do you get the closing notice?
Officially, the CTA equity agreement, we have to be given 2 weeks notice. I have been fortunate in that on the long-running shows that I have been on, they've given us much more than that. I think pretty much every time I've been on and hey, every show closes. No matter whether you're in a regional theater and it's going to be a 6-week contract, one thing, or you're on a commercial show and it's a long-running, every show closes.
Unless it's a Phantom.
Unless it's Phantom or like the Mousetrap, I think in England, in London. Other than that, it's closing or you're going to be leaving that show. For us, we've always had more than the official 2 weeks. Often we are given about 8 weeks and told, the show's closing, this is what's happening. And then at that point you do get the official, once that posting goes up on the call board that yes, officially this is the last official date, at that point you can choose to find more work, choose to book an awesome vacation or whatever you want to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's hard. It doesn't matter if you know it's coming or not. When you're on a long-running show, it's a little bit bittersweet, You've been working with a great group of people, and often if you are a stage manager, You're working with actors who are perhaps more emotionally invested in the show, more deeply emotionally invested in the show than you are as a stage manager. And so part of when a show is closing is supporting them through that, and making sure that whether you are running for another month or another week or another year, that the audience is still getting the same experience every night. Yeah.
Do you do anything special, like everyone together on the closing night? I know that sometimes when cast members leave, people sing like Happy Trails, but if the show closes, it's probably something different, I guess.
Yeah, I think it depends on the people. It really does. Often there's obviously, there'll be a closing night party of some sort. And sometimes, a little bit more of a check-in, before the show. Just a little, a little moment in a dressing room, a little moment backstage of all of us sort of gathering. That's happened for sure. Yeah, it honestly depends on the people you're with. Yeah.
What was your longest running show?
I think 2.5 years. A lot of the commercial shows I've done, I think that was like 2.5 years. That was Dirty Dancing, and I think that actually ran that long, including rehearsals. I was also on Kinky Boots, and we were at about a year. Wizard of Oz, we were about a year. Jersey Boys, I was just on the last 6 months of Jersey Boys, so I don't think that counts for me, but they ran quite a while here in Toronto, so yeah. Long time. Yeah.
Does it happen that someone starts as ASM, then becomes SM, but doesn't want to be a PSM?
Oh, of course. Oh my gosh.
The show?
Yes. Or even some people want to be ASMs, career ASMs, and they just want to stay there. They have no interest in calling. They just want to be backstage and supporting the backstage team. Absolutely. People make careers out of that, and that's amazing. That's great. And there are some people who prefer to stage manage, who just want to call. They want to, be the head communicator, or PSM, wants to be the head of the team. And then some of us, like myself, for instance, I like the variety of doing a little bit of everything. I like being backstage. I like calling. I like being in charge. I like someone else being in charge. Like all of it. It's all, I enjoy that part of it. But absolutely, and some people do. They do build their career up. They start as an apprentice, and then they ASM for a little while, and then they bump up to stage manager. In Canada, we actually there are very few theaters where there are PSMs, like commercial theater, yes. A place like Shaw and Stratford, yes. But a lot of places, the stage manager is the head of the show, so the boss of the team. Some people stay there and they really enjoy that, and perhaps never have the opportunity to actually have the title of PSM, even though they are the head of the stage management team for that show. But yeah, some people really just like to be in that role and don't ever want to sort of go then back to the backstage. Yeah, everyone's different, and you can honestly you can make a career out of whatever choice you make. ASM, always stage managing, or a variety of everything. Mm-hmm.
And is there a big difference in payment?
Depends on the theater. It's probably not as much as you think. Yeah, it's a lot of, for instance, on a big commercial show, being a PSM is a huge responsibility. It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of hours for not much financial compensation. Not much more a week.
All right. Do you need to be able to read music in order to stage manage musicals?
It helps, for sure. For instance, personally, I follow music, meaning when I can follow a score, I can read a score well enough, different time signatures, and the notes go up, the notes go down. What I don't do is I couldn't actually tell you what note it is. I can't tell a C from a E from a whatever, but I do actually call from score. Yeah. If you do opera, I think it's much more important. I don't stage manage opera, but those my friends who do, yes, I mean it's much more important. But as a stage manager of musicals, I can follow music well enough to call most scores from score. As an ASM in musicals, you don't necessarily need to read music at all, because you're not, you're often your book that you're creating your paperwork out of is just the text of a song, for instance, and the script part. It's not actually the music.
Why did you choose musical theater, not plays, for example?
You know what? I like doing both. I tend to work more in musical theater, just because I just really enjoy them. I enjoy they're often larger, they're often busier. There's more moving parts. There are more people. I enjoy the creative aspect of watching that process come together, watching the performers, sing and dance, and I really like it a lot. And I think it's an interesting way to tell a story, that when the emotion of a scene is heightened, well, you start to sing or you start to dance, and that's how you lift up the storytelling to the next level. And I think I think it brings a lot of people a lot of joy, and I love being a part of that.
How old were you when you found out that stage managers even exist?
I had actually I had finished my master's degree in science. And at that point, I had written up my thesis, and I was about to defend, or I had defended and I was doing my rewrites. I was in that process, like the very tail end of my master's degree, when I actually realized, what am I doing? This is not where I should be. I should be working in theater. And I think at that point, I had sort of kind of been an ASM backstage on some shows, and I'd kind of done that, and that's when I started talking to people who were, also doing the backstage stuff with me at various community theaters and things like that, and sort of realized, that is actually a job. Okay, all right, I can actually do this. So much later than other people. So I must have been in my mid-20s when I actually first started apprenticing, which was much older than a lot of people who were sort of in my cohort, who were coming through as apprentices with me. I was probably about 5 years older than most of them. But that's okay.
How did your family react?
They were surprised. They were very surprised, because at the time I was living here and my family was out west in British Columbia. And for them, having watched me go through sciences, they really thought, well, it's going to be science. They always knew that I had interest in theater and as a hobby, and they really thought that's what it was going to be. Theater was going to be a hobby and science was going to be my career. And so for them, I think it was a huge surprise when I suddenly changed career direction. But they've been great and supportive, and my mom likes to come see my shows. So.
What do you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Oh my gosh. I think I wish I'd had more information at the time about the joining process of equity, because I think my mistake was that I rushed through my apprenticeship. I did all 6 credits in 1 year, and I had some great mentors and I learned some great things, but what I wish I had done is I wish I had explored more options in the various facets of theater as an apprentice. For instance, I wish I had maybe tried out one of the big festivals like a Shaw or Stratford or the Charlottetown Festival. I wish I had tried out opera. I wish I'd tried out dance. Because a lot of what happens when you join equity is that a lot of the times your first few jobs, and so the basis of your career is networking. So it's based on the shows that you've already done or the places you've worked with, the people you've worked with. So the more opportunities you take as an apprentice, the more breadth of experiences you have, the larger of a base you have to build your career from. And I think because I rushed through, I was 25, I'd already had 2 degrees behind me, I was ready to start working. I was ready to start making a career. So I Did it all in a year and started working immediately, which was awesome and great, and I had some amazing mentors. But looking back, I think now it would have been great to have spent a little bit more time, maybe done a few more credits, and just explored a little bit more. So definitely looking back, that's advice I give to a lot of up-and-coming new apprentices, people thinking about stage management, is use your time as your apprenticeship to gain experience, to check things out, and to meet a lot of and work with a lot of different people.
By the way, do apprentices get paid?
Depends on the company. Some very little. Sometimes it's a living wage. It's not as much as an ASM, of course, but it's a weekly fee that at least allows you to live without a second job. So really, it depends on the theater company. Yeah.
What's the best advice you have ever been given?
Say yes. Just say yes. Yeah, yes, which means say yes to opportunity, say yes to trying something new, say yes to a job that comes in out of the blue, and who knows what will happen. So I think saying yes is definitely great advice.
And what's, in your opinion, the most common misconception about your job?
Oh gosh, that we are, especially female stage managers, are the mom. I hate that. I can't tell you how much I hate being told or being thought that that's what we are. We're like the mom. And I also hate our prompt script is the Bible. I hate that too. No, it's just a prompt script, and no, I'm not your mother. And that we're bossy. I think that no, it's not bossy. It's being clear, giving out information. But no, it's not being bossy.
There are different stages of production, and I guess your roles change over time. What's your favorite? Like rehearsals, tech week?
Oh gosh, you know what? I love watching the process come together in tech. So I love watching the creative and the technical come together. So the first time the actors are in costume under the lights with all the set and all the props is just magical. Or with the orchestra, the first time the cast sings with an orchestra, like all of that. Anytime the technical and the artistic come together, it's the best.
When I talked to a stage manager from opera, she told me that they call Spitzprop Orca in Toronto.
Yeah, only in opera. In musical theater, it's a Sitzprobe or a Vonderprobe. So a Sitzprobe meaning the actors are sitting in chairs, for instance, singing along with the orchestra for the first time. Vonderprobe meaning they're maybe walking lightly, doing their blocking or their dance moves while the orchestra is playing for the first time. Yeah, orca it's an opera term.
Yeah, like orchestra and
yes.
cast.
Yeah.
I was wondering.
Yeah.
And another question regarding opera, like I shadowed one of stage managers there, and I noticed that actors mark a lot during the
in operas. Yes.
Is it common in musicals too?
Sometimes if we're doing a scene or rehearsing a scene over and over again, a director will say, "Oh my gosh, mark this." And that could be to a vocalist, mark it vocally, like don't sing out. It could also be to dancers. Don't full out do all the flips or tricks or spins. Mark it through so it's for sequencing, for instance. Dancers use that term as sequencing. So what step comes next? You don't need to do the big, huge flip full out, but you need to know sort of where it happens in the music or in time. So yeah, and often there'll be times when they'll say, just mark this. The director will say, mark this. Or they'll say, I'm just going to mark that this time. The next time I'm going to do it full out. And that's, fairly common. Mm-hmm.
Is there anything you would like to talk about?
I think that stage management, it's a really great career for people who love the arts, who obviously love theater, who has a lot of appreciation for the technical side of what is being done and for the artistic side, and who is someone who can facilitate a rehearsal process, facilitate a creative process once it gets to the stage, support a director's vision, and collaborate. I think it's huge that we are not just organizers and communicators, but I think we're also collaborators. Creative problem solving, like you said before, is really key. And I think if someone who has those skills as well as that love of theater, I think this could be a great career. It's a great way to make a living. It can be challenging, it can be exhausting, but it's ultimately rewarding, because I think part of that applause every night, it's not just for the actors, it's not just for the direction or the music or the lights or the amazing costumes, it's a little bit for us too, because we've been a part of that process.
I have quite a kind of random question. I know that on Broadway every musical sends like opening night like notes to each other to other musicals.
Yes.
Do they do it in Toronto?
We sure do. Yeah, a lot of companies. In fact, a lot of companies, in Canada do. We'll send, I'll sign, get our, like the logo for the show, and we'll all sign it, and we'll, scan it and send it to different companies for absolutely openings, closings. We do. It's kind of a nice tradition. Yeah. Not all the time, but yeah, especially if you're affiliated, it's fun. Mm-hmm.
And who's counting the shows? Like today's show number 500?
Usually because the stage manager is making a note of that in the show report, and so often we are the ones who've sort of kept count. So every show report that of course the stage manager every night sends out a show report about what time the show started and if anything particularly great happened or bad happened or whatever. And that part of our show report will be the date and also what number of show it is. Yeah, so we do that. Mm-hmm.
And the last question, what are some, pinch me moments, like your favorite moments from your career?
There have been so many. For the most part, I think for me, my very first apprentice credit, the first time I did a show, and that was at Theatre Aquarius in Hamilton. The first time that I was a full member of Equity, and that was at Magnus Theatre in Thunder Bay, Ontario. The first time I got to work internationally, which was when I was in a rehearsal process in Buenos Aires, Argentina. That was huge.
Argentina.
Yes, it was incredible. And for me also, my first commercial musical theatre. The first time I was in one of these beautiful theatres here in Toronto, my first one was at the Royal Alexandra, and the first time I walked into that beautiful theatre, and the first time I got to, stand on the stage, and see that incredible 100-year-old building and know that I was going to be working there for the next few months. Huge. Yeah. Incredible moments. Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Well, thank you very much. This is the end of the interview.